Good evening, everybody. It's December 6th, 6:30. We'll get the meeting started. Chris was not able to get here today, so I have the honor and pleasure to do the chair today, like I did last week. And Kim will not be here, right? Yeah.
Right. She was trying to get back in time, but as of right now, she's not.
Yeah, so if she doesn't arrive, we will not do the executive session. We'll wait for her to come in another day. Does anybody have any opening comments before we get started? Go ahead, John.
Just three things. Last week on my little diatribe, I talked about a 14.4 increase in the budget, and Kim said 12.4. So I went back and saw where I'd mistaken an 8 or 9 for an 8, which only made $100,000 difference. And she's right. So it's 12.4% increase in the budget this year. So with regard to the library, I'm hoping that we could put the library off. We only got wind of this yesterday, and I'd like to have some opportunity with the changes and so forth that are coming up to review the library more. I have a real problem with when we are given things the night before to study them and so forth and prepare for a meeting. Just don't feel like I'm doing my job completely if I don't have some time to review things. And the third thing is last week we talked about the sidewalk. And I just want to throw out just one idea, and that is, and I think maybe a lot of you have already had it, that if we're tearing up the Main Street sidewalks and the water precinct has to put them back, my understanding the way they were, that we ought to just work with them and make sure that Main Street has the ultimate in sidewalks right now. And that's attack what is reasonable, where we can work together with the water precinct, get the most for our buck, and go and take care of the sidewalks where more people walk in town. So those are the three things I just wanted to mention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Anybody else have any? Lou, go ahead.
Yeah, Colin, I just want to make sure, please. Last week, I tried. We talked about the duties and authority of the Budget Committee, and I think there were some liberties taken. So I took care of that and noted that, and I went to the New Hampshire Revised Status 32.16. I don't think I should be bothering you over the time of reading it, but I think I would have a copy of it, and I would like to. Thank you.
No worries.
I would like to have the wording of New Hampshire Revised Status 32.16 put in the minutes.
Good.
Because I think that is, New Hampshire is a Dillon rule state.
Yep.
Which means that all powers not granted specifically by the state to the local communities are the purview of the state. So any addition or subtraction to our perceived authority or our real authority needs to be approved by the state legislature. So if you wouldn't mind, I would.
Great. And I would, if we could get that emailed to everybody, so we could all read it, that'd be great.
Here, I have a copy for everybody.
Oh, even better. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I think it's good practice to have a conversation. I've got a preamble that I'll talk about after the minutes, but we'll wait till afterwards. It's more budget related. So why don't we get into the minutes? Does anybody have any comments on updates to the minutes before we go through our motions?
I just have one edit on page 2, down to the paragraph starting, Vice Chair Beasley observed. I'm referred to as Selectman Beebe twice in the paragraph. So if we could just change that to Casey, that would be great. That's it.
Anybody else have any other comments?
Yes, Lubata is missing from the committee members present.
Your name is missing from the Budget Committee present list. Anybody else have any other comments?
I do.
Go ahead.
I read them in great detail, John. And I noticed that your comments on the master plan characterization were omitted from the minutes. I assume we're okay with that.
You mean the baloney part?
Yeah. Okay. Page 3 of 5, it was moved by Kelsey, K-E-L-S-I-E. It's K-E-L-S-E-Y. And that's all I have.
Lou?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure, even, I'm okay with withholding it, but I do think, and I know in the military, it's called the fog of war, that we take some liberties with our words, and I think that we have people, some of whom are in this room, who gave their heart and soul to elaborating a cogent vision for this town, for the future, which is iterated in a master plan. And I really, I take it to heart that for those people, having their word called baloney is really not appropriate. So I'll shut up. Thank you.
Any other comments on the minutes? The only comments I have regarding the minutes is action items, and in I guess reflection, I want to entertain with the group whether or not it's appropriate for us to be carrying action items from meeting to meeting. And if so, is it something that we want to vote on for every time we want to have an action item so that we're all in agreement that it should be an action item taken? So, for example, there were 3 action items that I raised that at least I took note of. One was maybe to you for the select board on getting input on how we could get a committee moving on sidewalks. The second action item was an assessment from Adam, and we can probably hear from him today on how the town is doing with respect to the master plan and how we can measure success. And the third action item was to monitor the water precinct Main Street work schedule for the corridor study funding date. So neither one of those action items are in the minutes, and I was wondering whether the team would be willing to, should we vote on them or ask them? Lou, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate for us to vote on them. I would also like, if I could, to add an action item, which is for the Budget Committee or representatives of the Budget Committee to work with the Selectmen and the Planning Board to refine the master plan. We know it's not today, but it's so we can actually have targets and metrics, and that we could use the master plan as a part of the budget.
So let's break this into piece parts, right? So the first 3 that I talked about were discussed last week.
Yeah.
You're bringing one
I
that we
am
should talk
all
about
in
for next
favor.
week, right? So is it appropriate that we vote on action items so that we're all in agreement? And if that's the case, then we'll carry them into this minutes and then make an approval. So why don't I do one at a time, get a motion, a second, and a vote. So the first one was to request BB to represent to the select board the need to get an input, perhaps through a committee, I guess select board can decide how, on sidewalks and master plan priorities. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in approval?
Aye.
Okay. The second one was, again, assessment from Adam on how the town is doing with respect to the master plan, get some sense of how we measure success. That's, again, this is for the minutes for last week. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Second? All 4? Okay. And the third one is to monitor the water precinct Main Street work schedule against the corridor study funding date.
Who's going to do that, Colin?
I think that we will have to pay attention to the presentation that will be provided by the water precinct next select board meeting. Hopefully they'll provide a schedule, and then we can look at that schedule and we can take a look at how we would modify the budget, possibly, if they were going to complete all their work in '25, to try to get the corridor study done in a time where you can have an impact on the sidewalks and what else we may want to do with Main Street, all right? Because I think if I recall correctly, it's been pushed off to '26, which might be too late, right? The Main Street might be done by then, so. Okay. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Second? All four? Okay, so if we could modify the minutes to include those three actions, and then I would propose that we follow up on those actions at subsequent meetings, all right, and just track them, all right? Okay, so can I have a motion for approving of the minutes?
So
Subject
moved.
to the conversation? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Excuse me, we're good. Okay, next item on the agenda, Selectmen's update.
Okay, at our meeting last Thursday, we had a presentation from Jones and Beach Engineers on an initial study that we requested of 2 lots down by Buckland Beach. This study was requested at the suggestion of Bill Helm when he was reviewing all of the pieces of property that the town owns with the thought of where we might be able to put a police station. We aren't considering these 2 lots for the police station, but the thought was maybe we should have an initial study done on what those 2 properties might be used for in the future. So it was reported to us that the smaller lot right across the street from the beach is all pretty much wetlands and not really usable. The larger piece that has the stump dump on it actually does have a lot of potential for things like expanding the transfer station, ground-mounted solar panels, or a wastewater treatment plant. It probably would not be able, most definitely wouldn't be able to be used for another water source, which is something that the water precinct is looking at, but could be used as a water treatment plant if it was determined that water could be taken out of Little Lake Sunapee. So we're not moving forward with any more steps with that study right now. The next steps would be soil testing, but there's no urgency, so we're not moving ahead with that at this time. We had a holiday luncheon for all the town employees on Friday. Multiple employees were recognized for their work anniversaries up to 35 years. And the winter gathering is next Friday, right? December 15th, 8 a.m. And at that meeting, we will have members from the water precinct giving an update to all of the attendees as well. That's it.
Thank you, Bibi. Any questions for Bibi? Okay, before we get into the budget, 2 things. Let's first address John's comment about the library. Crystal, I know you're here for that. I don't know whether it's okay with you. I know you were originally scheduled for January 10th. I suspect that Kim rearranged it because of your departure date. Is that possible?
So there were a few reasons for shifting the date, and we requested the change prior to Thanksgiving, and it was approved, partly because of my departure date, but also because of aligning my schedule with that of our treasurer and chair, who have travel plans over the holidays, and avoiding library board meetings that are occurring on some of the same Wednesday evenings. Also, we did rearrange our schedules to be here tonight, so would just appreciate being able to give our presentation. I submitted the documents, and I'll hold off on saying anything more until we get to that point in the agenda, but I'll just say that I submitted the documents that memo, budget, and capital reserve budget on November 20th to the town. I'm not sure what happened past that point, and I know that we presented at the select board meeting last Thursday, so maybe there was waiting for that to happen, but we tried to give as much notice as we could in advance for this request. So I'm not certain that another date is possible for me to be at. Yeah.
Would there be, is there any possibility for someone to be available in the future for follow-up questions if we have them?
Yeah, so I'll be in the position until January 5th, so I can also respond in written format for follow-up questions if I can't be here until that point, and have worked to explain some of the inner workings of the budget to the treasurer and chair. Yeah.
John, are you okay with proceeding tonight and then just being, if you do some more homework and you have a follow-up questions, is that okay?
Well, we don't have an alternative, so
Yeah.
we must proceed,
Yeah.
but just seems like we're always presented with this last second stuff, an agenda that comes out the night before, and we're supposed to show up here and act like we know what we're talking about. And I just think it's unfortunate and inappropriate. And this is going to be a special year as far as the library is concerned because of the changeover. So I'm really sorry it's that way, but I think we have to accommodate you the best we can, so.
So I would propose in our other business segment of the agenda tonight that we look at the schedule and we firm it up so that there are no surprises, all right, going forward, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so before we get into the administrative side of the business, if you can indulge me, I do have a preamble I'd like to talk about just to help everybody get a perspective of where I stand and what is underlying my questions that will come out over the next several weeks. I know that revenue is going to be reviewed later in our schedule, but I think a high-level look at the revenue sheets along with the continued economic headwinds that we reviewed last week can provide some important context for our discussions. The general fund revenue line decreased 17.6% year over year, 25 budget over 24 budget, when we remove the transfers from capital reserves. If we also adjust for bond proceeds, revenue declined 11%. 2021 revenue has declined, since 2021, revenue has declined 1.6%, basically flat. It's down 6% since 2020. I think this truly points to the need for town leaders to look at the top line. On the other hand, as we know, the budget before us has a general fund cost projected to increase 12% year over year and 28% since 2021. More astounding, the general fund has increased 53.7% over 2019's actual. At this rate, the budget will double by 2028 over 2019. Flat or declining revenue and double the cost. I know there are some folks, even some in this room, who believe New London taxpayers can afford these ever-increasing costs. My caution to all of us is not to be influenced by such a broad stroke. There are folks who are challenged by the rising costs in the economy and on their tax bills. So my focus this year, and I'm just going to give everyone kind of a perspective of where I'm coming at it, while considering the risk factor we talked about last week, which I think is an important one, I will continue to, again, balance the asks against the tax impact by teasing the ask into the need and the want. So I'm going to ask all the department heads to differentiate need versus want. By stretching out the time period we may believe is necessary for our wants. By reevaluating the asset lives. By looking for budget synergies across departments. By looking at budget forecast accuracy. By looking at or asking for a forecast for future years so we are informed about the future impact of this year's decisions, by asking whether the budget request meets the taxpayers' goals. Regarding budget accuracy, the general fund had a surplus of $1.4 million in 2023. A good part of that was in the capital outlay section. That means we raised taxes for a budget that was 14% higher than it was spent. In effect, we established a budget that's higher than needed, set the tax rate, then reduced the tax rate by accessing previous year underruns, the unassigned fund balance. I know budgeting in the public sector is as much a science as it is an art, but I would think we want to be better than 14% off. My preliminary analysis shows we would have had a lower tax rate with a better budget forecast than we ended up with from the machinations involved with the unassigned fund balance. And also, while we, the Budget Committee, are not responsible for other components of the tax bill, schools, water precinct, et cetera, I would ask that we at least stay aware of those pressures as we consider the impacts of our actions on the taxpayer. So all this said, along the lines of BB's exercise at the Select Board meeting, I'm hoping that the approaches I outlined can help us reduce the Select Board presented budget in the general fund by up to 2% without materially increasing risk. Time will tell whether or not we can do that, but those analyses, I think, will help us understand that. I think this goal necessarily requires a focus on the larger budgets. When we get to the revenue budget, I'd like us to consider a formal request of the Select Board to establish a committee to look at the top line, the revenue side of the equation, and provide the town with a financial view of where this is all heading. For example, what type of revenue growth and cost pressures, if any, will we see from zoning changes that are encouraging affordable housing in 2 years and in 3 years? I think there will be an impact on both the revenue and the cost. I think now more than any time before, it's important to put structure around the top line and to explore the risk in managing the budget more tightly. Those risks could include, among other things, not focusing on the taxpayers' priorities, service levels that we're offering, and the affordability of even living in this town. So that's my preamble, and if anybody has any comments on it, then I'm happy to open it up, but that's what's going to drive my questions, okay? Okay, with that, town clerk, tax collector. How do you want to orchestrate this? So I'm looking at the agenda, and we're now into the, oh, I'm sorry, library. My apologies.
Well, thank you for allowing me to present this evening, despite the change of schedule from the original agenda. I hope that my presentation can at least outlay some of the higher points of the budget and that the library board has approved, and I'm happy to follow up on questions as I'm able to, like I said, before January 5th. And beyond that point, we'll make sure there's a clear contact point for the library. I just want to acknowledge that I am joined by two of the library trustees tonight, Sherry Williams, who is the chair of the board, and Tom Carley, who is the treasurer, so thank you. So I'm just going to go through some of the high points that are included in the budget memo, which is, it looks, I'm assuming that you all have a copy of this, and this is the revised budget memo dated November 20th. The board had originally approved a slightly higher budget and made some amendments on November 15th, and this is the reflection of those changes. So the town appropriation request from the library for fiscal year 2025 is $709,895. And that reflects an increase of 11.7% over the appropriation in the fiscal year 2024 budget. And the town appropriation accounts for 90.3% of the total library budget in the fiscal year 2025. The remaining amount will be covered by other library funding sources. That appropriation covers most but not all of the basic operating expenses of the library. The areas that have that I wanted to call out in the operational expenditures for the year is that for personnel, we have an increase of 19% across wages, benefits, and a compensation adjustment line. Some of that is due to an adjustment where the library will be looking to hire a part-time maintenance position, and so funds were pulled from the maintenance section of the budget to help account for that. Also, the library board has anticipated, but they have not decided on, but have budgeted for a 6% wage increase, which includes a 3.5% COLA and a 2.5% step increase. The overall benefit increases are based on the calculations I received from the town. And then that new line that has been added, which is line 21 for compensation adjustment, is because the Board of Trustees will be looking at options to review library staff wages, making sure that they're in line with cost of living for the area and also the responsibilities for the job and in comparison with other libraries and town departments. The goal is to bring library staff wages in line with 2025, and paying library staff a fair and competitive wage is a priority. The other two areas I'll mention is that there are two areas of large decrease. The maintenance area, again, it was decreased by 24.2%. That was partly due to some funds being moved into the personnel line for an actual part-time employee, and then other adjustments that were made based on projections for actual expenditures. And then the trustee expense line was reduced significantly, and that's because the funds for the strategic planning process that is currently in process are set to conclude at the end of this fiscal year. I will also just say I would love to be able to tell you about the capital reserve fund, but before I do that, maybe just to focus, I know it's not capital reserve night, but again, given the circumstances, but I did receive some questions in advance, and I am happy to respond to those here, and also any other questions that you have. Colin, how would you like me to proceed?
Why don't we get questions first, and then we'll open it up.
Okay.
Any other questions so far?
Crystal, I have one question. Do you happen to know how the board came up with a 3.5% COLA, how they came up with that number?
There was some discussion about what would be appropriate there, and knowing the cost of inflation and where things were, they thought that was a modest amount. And again, they won't decide that until later in the spring. They typically wait until after the Board of Selectmen makes their selection or decision about that. And so we didn't have data to support it. Because of the way the library's personnel budget is funded only through our budget, in the past, if we have budgeted under, then we have to find somewhere within the budget to make up those funds, so that we have to wait until the spring to have more information, I think is what caused us to go more in the middle ground of where we think it might actually fall instead of on the lower end.
Okay, thanks.
Bibi, do you know what the working assumption is in the town's budget?
No, we just put aside a chunk of money.
Yeah.
For the time being, we haven't come up with the amount yet. I just say that because I happen to know the federal employee rate they just set at 3.2%. So
the 150K that was put aside, Lynn, I think it's 36,000 for a percent, right? So that's a 4% increase, but part of that 150K is going to be accommodating the change in the wage structure, right?
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll get into some of those details when Kim gets here, or when we go through Kim's work.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd rather have her go over
Yeah,
it than me.
agreed, yep, okay. Mark?
Hi.
Hi.
Could you just expand on the part-time maintenance position?
Yes, so presently, the library contracts out for snow removal, and also has a need for kind of handyman assistance. There's a lot of small things that aren't done regularly, and we contract out for cleaning service. So the idea, for 5 days a week. So the idea is that if someone were to be in the building year-round, could help with the day-to-day type of custodial and maintenance things, snow removal in the winter. That's especially important because we have a lot of snow that kind of avalanches off the roof in our emergency exits, and not being able to deal with that daily causes a big kind of ice situation. And so making sure that our emergency exits would be safe. And then still perhaps having some cleaning service, but on a more occasional basis to do the deeper weekly cleaning that needs to be done. That is something where I think there was still some discussion on exactly what that position would look like, but it would be a regular part-time position.
Question, please. Crystal, on receipt item 6, it's nice you reflect reality because over the years it's been below budget. But then on 7, gifts and memorials, over the last several years, 4 to 5 years, have been way below budgeted. So why not reflect it? Why not reflect reality unless there's something, and you're actually increasing it by increasing it by $1,000? Why is that?
I am not sure I'm following. So
Okay,
in
you got
for
19,
gifts and
memorials, 7,500.
yeah.
The actual 61. 20, 7,500, and actual 29. 21 is 7,500, and actual 23. 22 is 6,000, yep, you went,
Yep.
you hit 9,000. This one in 23, 6,000, and you spent 54. And in 25, then you were budgeting 8,000, why, 7,000. Why increase it when in fact you spent lower than budgeted in 4 out of the 5 years?
So I would say that, recalling my own memory, the reason for increasing in fiscal year 2024 is because that process was done during the year when we received 9,285 after budgeting 6,000. And it is a very difficult thing to estimate how many donations we will receive from the community, and it is not uncommon for us to have someone note in their memorial donations to the library, which can result in several $1,000s of donation at one time. So the reason why we estimate that at 7,000 is because it actually doesn't seem like an unreasonable number. I can't speak to the practices before I was here and why there were a few years that were so low, but I would guess that in fiscal year 2020 and 2021, those were pandemic years where the library was not open, and so people did not see a reason to donate. I would just speculate that they maybe didn't see a reason to donate to the library when there were so many other things that did require donations during that time. And I don't think that budgeting based on what happened during the years when the library was completely or partially closed due to the pandemic would be an accurate estimate.
Okay. Benefits, the 97 to 126, that's, what you just alluded in your comment before. I see another one, copier lease.
I just wanted to go back to that, Lou. I wanted to make sure, so I think you might have the columns reversed on that one. And so in fiscal year 2023, the budget for benefits was 100,134, and the actual was 97,362. That's pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got one here that minus 86 for the copier lease.
And-
Why is,
Oh, and I will also just say that the benefits are calculated based on actual anticipated employees.
Okay.
So it is actually calculated on projected wages and hours worked. So,
Okay.
yeah. And what was it then?
the copier, minus 86%, would it?
Yeah. Yes,
I hate to
so,
become so granular.
No,
but looking at
I'm
these
glad you're
big
asking, yeah.
Changes, and it's,
so in fiscal year 2023, the library, let me make sure I'm looking at this line correctly. Yes, so in fiscal year 2023, the library's lease was past its end on the copier, and the Board of Trustees approved the purchase of a new copier. So we own the copier, which was paid for out of the equipment funds that year. And so the lease is actually now just a very small service contract with the company that provides repairs and supplies for us.
beautiful.
Yeah,
All right.
good question.
The IT is minus 58%, wait.
And again, I just want to note, that was from fiscal year 2024 was minus 58, and that was because of the addition of a new line. So we separated out the IT service versus the IT hardware and software, so service versus actual material costs. And in fiscal year 2025, we kept that flat, 0%.
Now, the additional, right now, you have a consulting group that is looking at, the study and the library and
For the strategic plan, yes.
yeah. Where is that coming out of?
That comes out of the line 66 trustee expense.
Okay. And then the professional meetings, you raised them by 33%. Is that a?
Professional meetings are so that some of our staff can attend conferences regionally and nationally for professional development. It helps the library stay up to date on things and learn from other professionals in the field. And this allows for one national and possibly two local conferences where travel and overnight stays are required. Travel expenses have increased exponentially.
Melissa, go ahead.
So do we have a estimate on when travel is allowed to stay overnight, like how many miles?
So I don't have a travel policy on that, and I think it is typically when there's a multi-day conference where the time spent traveling back and forth would take so much out of the day versus the opportunity to stay a little bit later, participate in evening conference activities. I think that Manchester is a frequent location for conferences, and Meredith, so they're an hour's drive away. And if there was an interest in attending a conference in one of those locations, it would be considered on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned, I'm sorry, but you do not have a travel policy?
No.
So who approves travel?
The director.
You, only you?
Well, someone else moving forward, but yes. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Bibi?
Unless anybody, I don't want to, because this will be my second turn.
It's okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Crystal, this might come up when you're talking about the capital reserve accounts, but on line 14, why is it that you're only going to bring in $25,000 out of the library reserve funds where the last couple of years it's been around 45?
Yeah, actually, I received that question in email, so let me pull up my response for that. So looking at the history, to my knowledge, the use of library reserve funds was first incorporated into the budget in fiscal year 2023, and that was done as a way to offset some of that year's budget increase by utilizing the reserve that had grown due to library donations and earned income that was not spent in prior years. The reserve funds are intended to supplement, not supplant, taxpayer funds. I've discussed with the board the recommended practice of having 1 to 3 months of operating funds in the unrestricted reserve fund accounts. And for fiscal year 2025, the projected start balance of unrestricted reserve accounts is approximately $50,000, while the fiscal year 2025 monthly operating expenses average over $65,000. So the unrestricted reserve funds are limited, and the balance of the unrestricted reserve funds has decreased over the past 2 years as we've drawn on them. And so the library's finance committee recommended to the full library board of trustees that the operating revenue come from the reserve funds be decreased for fiscal year 2025 in order to preserve some of that reserve that continued to be accessed in future years if needed. And these are the reserve funds that are from additional earned income from the library, so it's not the trustees' funds. It's not the trustee of trust funds, the town funds, yeah.
What is the source of funds for the reserves?
So some of the funds come from donations from our earned income due to non-resident fees and other fees that the library charges. And it's essentially the funds. If you're looking at the detailed library budget, it's the funds that fall above the line 12.
Okay.
And typically, the trust funds would the Tracy funds, which comes from the town's trust, would all be spent typically in the current fiscal year, but those typically aren't deposited back in if there was any left. Because it's come in as interest revenue from that trust.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
You know, I still have to reiterate, I'm uncomfortable with the lack of a travel policy that would have reimbursements when they're allowed or disallowed, or who submits and when do they submit the travel vouchers. And it's just, and I believe that, especially when a change of director, that having somebody have a reimbursement approved for an item which somebody was denied, it could end up causing, policy dispute or legal liability. I just think it would be nice if you had a standard operational procedure saying these items are available, or these items are reimbursable and these items are not.
Well, I would say that we have not a formal policy, but we have standards that have been followed consistently. And also,
Written.
no. It's certainly something that the library board can consider for the future. And I would just say that the treasurers do review all of the things that we sign off on, and there's never been any question or concern about the types of expenses that were reimbursed. So I think we follow pretty typical travel reimbursement standards for government organizations. I've worked in government for a long time. We just don't have a written policy in place, which is pretty common for small libraries. Don't have necessarily a policy for everything, but noted that it's something to be considered for the future.
Does the town have a written policy?
We have a policy on what is reimbursable when people go to conferences and the like what on a receipt we're willing to repay for food, not like alcohol, that kind of thing. I don't think there's a written policy like with mileage as to, like it has to be so many miles away, and it's considered, again, case-by-case basis, but we go to Manchester, we go to Concord, and we travel to and from the day of. I think if it, again, puts a burden, North Conway, we're definitely going to cover a room. So it just depends on the burden it puts on the employee to get there.
And just a few more things I'll add for accountability. We use the federal mileage rate. We use the federal per diem rates as a guide. There actually haven't been any extremely local conferences that we've had overnight travel for, but there was to Springfield, Massachusetts. So, I mean, I don't think we've done anything unreasonable there. I think it's just that there isn't a formal policy in place. Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Crystal, comment on the stone wall repairs and the major repairs to the exterior of the building.
Yeah, can we hold that for when we actually go through the capital reserve document? Do you mind?
No, don't mind at all.
Just since we're on operating, and I have a few other questions for the operating side. Is that okay, Colin?
Yeah. it's
Okay.
fine, Yeah. I have a question on the operating, but as a commentary on the policy, should you explore the policy, it would seem, rather than reinvent the wheel, you should just look at the town policy and adopt it,
Sure.
right? I mean.
Something to
why
consider.
wouldn't, right, but.
Yeah.
Utilities.
Yes.
Does the library leverage all the contracts the town has for all the utilities?
Yes, so we are in the same group for electricity and propane, and we do not use oil. The library's billed separately for our usage, and we pay the bill directly.
So they're under the contract? Okay, good, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I also had a question about line 57 previously. Do you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the question was, while not a lot of money on line 57, it shows the library is not spending their budgeted amount in repairs. Given the identified list of necessary repairs, what is behind this underspend? So I went back for the 2 years where I was responsible for that part of the budget. And in fiscal year 2025, we budgeted $25,000 and spent $13,915. We had, in that year, this is the same for both fiscal year 2023 and 2022. We had several maintenance facilities and repairs that were reported in lines specific to the equipment being serviced that wound up being over budget for a total of $13,712. And the items that were over budget were offset by the reduced spending in line 57 as we worked on our projections through the year. So we put the expense where it was supposed to fit, and on the back end, we're tracking the projections. So in new equipment, we purchased a new copier machine, an elevator maintenance. We just had some extra service that was required. Fuel was over, electricity was over budget, water was a little bit over, and the grounds portion was over because we had tree removal and pruning that year, so a pretty big expense there. There were also a few maintenance projects in 2023 that we tried to get scheduled before the end of the year, but was difficult to get things scheduled, so they happened at the beginning of fiscal year 2024, which included walkway repairs and some minor exterior repairs. And then we also intentionally build in a cushion to repairs because there are so many unanticipated small projects that come up during the year. We've got, the 14,000 square foot, 200-year-old building. And so having those extra funds is a good practice just in case they are needed so that we don't have to go into capital reserve for smaller expenses or hold off on a much needed repair until the next year because we didn't have enough funds. So then in fiscal year 2022, it was a very similar scenario, so I don't know if you need all of the details, but essentially we were over in several areas that are related to facilities, but not in that repair line, and we offset those funds by not spending as high in the repair line. I will note that in fiscal year 2025, we did reduce that line to 15,000, which seems more in line with the amount of actual small repairs we're getting done, and with the hiring of a part-time maintenance person, may not need to hire out some of the smaller things that we need to hire out for.
Crystal, what do you do with the surplus every year?
With the surplus?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the surplus in the last few years has been out of the earned income from the library, and that is what goes into the reserve account that then we try to use in future years as needed. The earned income for the library is held by the library trustees.
So you're able to, from an accounting point of view, differentiate the monies you get from the town, flow them through the entire budget, and understand whether those are spent or not, and do the same thing for the monies that don't come from the town?
Yes.
And-
Yeah, so for every expenditure, now we track what fund was used to pay for that expenditure. So the taxpayer funds go specifically to the primary operating costs, specifically personnel, maintenance, and books and materials, and some of the other equipment. Yeah.
Do you ever have a surplus on town appropriations?
Not since the pandemic. The 2 years during the pandemic are the only year I know of, and we did track and return funds to the town in those years.
Any other questions on the operating budget? Okay, Chris, why don't you bring us through the capital budget?
Great.
And this will be an exception for,
Thank you.
no thanks required. It's fine, okay, I just wanted to, I'm not expecting, there's a schedule for capital outlays, which will be later on in the schedule, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
So the library's request for capital reserve deposit in fiscal year 2025 is $100,000 into the library building maintenance fund. We have some necessary expenditures in the coming year, and let me just pull this up so I have it. And so what we have projected for fiscal year 2025 is funds to rebuild a deteriorating stone wall, which may require the removal of a tree, and also to replace some deteriorating sections of our walkway, and also some major exterior repairs that have been for many years now patched, and the patches are now not sufficient. So there are some areas where it's actually causing damage to the building to not go in and do a rebuild of those areas. So that was noted in an assessment of the exterior of the building, and also has been noted by our roofing company, who noted that there's moisture, particularly at the top of the building, that is no longer being kept out. You can see the damage there. So, the reason for this, we also have a number of expenses this year. So the projection that you see shows what we anticipate spending in the current fiscal year, the deposit for fiscal year 2025, and then the expenditures anticipated for fiscal year 2025. It's also worth noting that even if for some reason things come in under the estimate that we have, there are many repairs and maintenance of larger size needed by the library, many of which have been deferred over the years, and the largest one being that, looking ahead, we will need a major portion of the slate roof to be replaced, and we've just had a roof inspection done. We're waiting on the results on that to see how that is doing at this point, but we know that that slate is very old and is softening and beginning to break.
Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah. Chris, my question is simply on the priority of expenditure, capital expenditure. Generally, the building seems to be the big need, constantly exterior, interior, and you just stated the slate roof is another expense that's going to be forthcoming. Why is rebuilding the stone walls so important?
That's a great question, and the reason is that, so the stone wall along the back side of the library abuts two neighboring residential properties, and at the back corner of that wall, the wall is leaning and some of the stones are actually falling out into the neighbor's property. So this was brought to our attention at a public meeting earlier this year, and it's something that the Board of Trustees has been working to assess and determine what the right solution is. They are working with a few contractors now to try to get multiple perspectives and quotes on what should be done.
Okay. I'm a stone wall builder, so I just look at it as, okay, if they are structural walls, that's one thing. If they're aesthetic walls, that's another thing. And if there are a few rocks flowing into the abutting neighbor's property, move the rocks versus 100,000s of rebuilding a stone wall and then removing a tree in addition.
It is a retaining wall for the yard. So we are at our yard our garden in the back is at a
Yep.
different level than theirs. So the wall is kind of supporting that. It would change. So just to answer your question, it's not only cosmetic, although I understand what you mean by
Yeah.
structural may be
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah. Is it a need or a want? Do you think?
I would have to take that question back to the Board of Trustees.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think I have the expertise in stone walls to make that assessment on the fly right now.
No,
Yeah.
thanks. Okay.
Anybody have any other questions? Crystal, I have a couple. Back to the stone walls. Have you ever entertained looking for volunteer work to do the outside work?
That has not come up in the discussions. I can certainly take that back to the Facilities Committee for them to consider. I think that, for most of our work, we're looking for someone who is insured to do the work and who has professional experience, and that can sometimes be a challenge. It frankly has been difficult to find an available stone wall worker to be paid that can come take a look. So I think we have found a few that are willing to take a look, but I will take that suggestion back.
I mean, it's a lot of money, right? And you're talking about spending that money up front in 2025. I wasn't this year, but a year ago, I visited the library as one of the preliminary budget committee reviews, and you were kind enough to walk us around the building. It's a mess. I mean, there's windows rotting out and soffits rotting out, and so, I mean, do we have a professional view that is the exterior work that's planned for this year fixing things or patching things?
Fixing things.
So we're going to replace windows, replace
Yes.
soffits, replace wood, okay?
Yeah.
And do we have an expert
There's-
opinion that this roof is going to last out until
That's what
2028?
Yeah, so let me address both of those. So the exterior repairs, like the siding and the windows and that sort of thing, those were noted by an assessment we had done in January of 2023 by a professional, and those have been added to, like, all of those things are accounted for in a tracking list that we have now of projects to be worked on. And I think the goal is to group quite a lot of those together rather than doing them one at a time. And then the roof inspection, we originally had a roof inspection done in October 2021, and that was done by WeatherCheck, a professional roofing company that specializes in slate, and the timeline that is on this document here is based on that inspection, and we just had them up on the roof last week to revise their inspection and let us know if the timeline is the same or has changed at all, and we specifically talked about that portion of the roof. So we will know more on that soon.
Oh, so they did the analysis and they're going to get back to you?
Yeah,
So that's a possible follow-up then?
it is, yeah.
When do you expect to get return word back?
Hoping to hear back in the next few weeks, so.
Will
We
it
were
be-
supposed to hear back, but I think there was a extenuating circumstance, so.
Will it be in time for the capital review cycle so that we allocate the right money should it be required?
Yes, so if we find out that either for the stone wall or the roofing or anything changes here, we will definitely provide that update. What is the date for the capital reserve on the schedule? January 17th, yeah.
How does the library go about coordinating projects? You know, we learned a lot by having a project manager at Whipple Hall, you know,
Yeah.
and really working through that process. Does your facilities committee have expertise to project manage contractors, and do they get engaged in that work?
We haven't had a project of Whipple Hall size since I started. There was the sprinkler project at that time, which was managed in between myself, the facilities committee, and we had a former trustee who also was an architect and served to help with the some of the management of that process as well. So it was, I guess, a team effort at that point. And most of the other projects we've had have been single, one-off repairs, might have lasted a couple of days. And a fair amount of that has fallen to my shoulders, but a lot of the scoping of the projects and getting quotes is through the facilities committee, and they work on determining who to go with and recommending that for approval to the board of trustees, and then support me in that process as we go through it.
Would the library be interested in collaborating with the town? And, you know, what I'm thinking about is when we go through the capital reserve process and look at all the work that needs to be done for buildings, I think we learned a lot when Chief Cobb came to the table while we were doing Whipple Hall, and when she wanted to expand the dispatch center, the cost to do that, since they were here, was significantly less than it would have been if they weren't here. So if you can spend some time working through all the work that needs to be done in the town in a certain period and contract that out all together and try to get synergies between all those buildings and all the work, the cost might be less. So would the library be willing to collaborate on that?
I will take that to the facilities committee as a suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you'll get back to us by when? Sometime before the capital reserve conversations? It would be, I think it'd be a valuable conversation to have to understand whether or not we can collaborate with the library and get some synergies, right?
I'll provide you with an update before my departure and
Great.
let you know who the contact person is moving forward.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, thoughts? And Crystal, I forgot to mention, thank you for your service. You will be missed.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you very much. If you have any further questions that come up once you've had a chance to review things in more detail, you can email them to me. It's director@tracylibrary.org, and I will do my best to get back to you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And good luck in your job.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, next item on the list is what? Town clerk, tax collector. Will, you're up.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly, yeah.
Just before we'll get started, I noticed he made his comments about what staff wages and what they included were, and Kim made a comment about what she said they were, and they weren't exactly the same. And as we go forward here, the wages and the potential wage increases this year are something I think that we as a board really need to understand quite carefully. And I know most of us have looked at the charts and the wage study and things like that. But I didn't know if there's someone among us who can explain what we're looking at when we look at these numbers here and what we could expect going forward.
Well, the select board hasn't discussed the COLA at all. So they put a placeholder in for $150,000, which would include any changes they decide to do from the wage study and any COLA that they decide to do for the fiscal year. But they haven't talked about any of those that are going to be implemented yet.
Okay, so what we have here in our budget Now, Will mentioned that COLA was involved, or an anticipated COLA was involved in the wages that you talk about. Kim says it wasn't in hers. What are the numbers we're looking at here? Do they have,
The line items for each individual wage does not have a COLA in it.
it just has a step?
It just has your step in there. So
Okay.
whatever anybody's going to earn on their step.
Okay.
The
And then-
placeholder, way at the bottom of the executive budget is the placeholder for the COLA.
Okay.
Okay, I want to add to John's question. So just, can we take an example and just take town administrator's salary? The increase that's reflected is 8%. So that 8% is what?
It's a little complicated because last year, instead of putting it into the line item for the wage, they put it in, again, down at the bottom, the $200,000. So it's not reflected in the individual wage for the COLA that we got. So that's going to skew your percent increase. So it does look like it's an 8% increase, but it's not.
Okay.
I know. I know.
It's not 8%, but it is 8%.
It's 8%, but it's because we did not,
What was the last year's COLA?
5.25. So 5.25 and your 2.5 brings you up to your,
That is plus 2.5 is 8.
right. And it's just skewed because I've put it in that number for fiscal year 2025, but it wasn't in the 24 number, that COLA.
Okay?
Oh, I thoroughly understand, yeah.
We'll have an opportunity to talk about it more, I think, when Kim is here. Will, you're up.
All right. Hi. Thanks for taking the time. Will Kidder, Town Clerk, Tax Collector, General Town Customer Service. As the Town Clerk side of things, we are going up by $215, and that's printer ink, which we go through a boatload of. And we need a new town seal because the one that we have is working by the grace of Dan's business card at this moment, folded up inside it, and has been for 3 months. So that's the Town Clerk side. Do you want me to stop after each one or take questions? Okay. And then I'm going to jump to Tax Collector and go to the $50 increase there that we're probably going to need to file some more stuff at Registry of Deeds, as there's some upcoming leaning deeding that will require a little bit more there, not tremendously. Obviously, the big piece is the piece that we talked about last year, which is sort of a twofold thing that's going on there. One is the new ballot machine that we need, because the ballot machine we have now is only slated to be supported through the end of '24, which gives us issues going into '25. It would be, I would use the word a disaster if that were to fail before then. And we would lose lots of volunteers because they don't want to hand count. I don't blame them. I might be one of them. So that is the majority of the increase. The other thing that's going up in terms of ballot machine expenses is when you have there's cards that get programmed that goes into this for each election. And when you do that, it's the cost for that is based on how many people are on the ballot, and or if it's a town ballot, it would be how many articles and that sort of stuff too. But when you have ballots like we've had recently in the upcoming presidential primary, one is going to have 21 people on it and the other is going to have 24 people on it. So that is a huge programming cost. So that has gone up pretty significantly as well. That part is gonna change a little bit depending upon what ballot machine we go with. Michael and I are pretty locked in on the one that we want at this point. I mean, ultimately, the selectmen are the ones that decide the ballot machine that we go with. My understanding from the meeting the other night is they're going to kind of defer to Michael and I that and take our recommendation. They need to do some more testing on these before they're officially certified, which should happen by March. We've seen the machine that we like. We had an appointment to see the one that we don't like quite as much, but that got canceled because there's some sort of issue that we don't know about that they need to go back to the ballot commission for on the 14th. So we will definitely look at that one because it's prudent to do so. And once they figure out what their issue is, that I don't know what it is. So that is me in a nutshell.
Anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, a couple of them. Will the, I don't know if it's conferences and training, I don't know if under town clerk, it's a $1,000 and you increase is 100%. What is that?
In my estimation, it went up because Diane is coming to those now, and we can't double up in rooms.
Okay.
A lot of it would be frowned on.
Okay, the ballot machine expense, we got to pay the piper there.
Yeah, and that's,
This is, the town clerk's salary, have we done an equivalence on what town clerks get paid in the state of New Hampshire? Because I thought it was slow, and I looked at salary.com and several of the other places, and average salary for a town clerk, tax collector in New Hampshire is $42,250, and it goes from a low of 40 to a high of 50, and Glassdoor has 63,000 as a top salary. I just wonder if when was the last study as far as the how do you call it, the salary for a town clerk, tax collector?
The wage study that just got done included that.
Wow.
Yeah, but Lou, don't forget, Will gets paid the town clerk salary and the tax collector salary, both together.
Yeah. So there is that.
Not to say he's not worth more.
Okay.
We don't need to get into that debate.
All right, now that's, okay.
You buy a town clerk and tax collector, and you get an AV
Okay,
guy free.
never mind, I'm corrected, good to know. I'm like, God.
And I'll say that the AV guy being free is a temporary thing, just so that's on camera.
Any other questions? I just noticed that there's no computer support allocations. It's not going to, I know it doesn't matter to the bottom line, but.
For his department,
Yeah.
he's rolled into the finance one.
Okay. Okay.
He is our computer.
I'm hard to figure out where I fit in lots of reasons.
That's probably a good thing.
Yes.
One last, if I may, the money for the ballot machine expense, does that include training?
Yes, it would.
Everything, it's all inclusive?
It's going to be all inclusive. There's going to be nothing. That includes, that's everything down to protectors for surge protectors and that sort of stuff, as close as we can get it. Obviously some of that stuff ships around a little bit, but that should be everything included.
So you don't anticipate additional?
I don't. I'll tell you right now that I'll be standing here next year for the ballot voting booths, and that will be another $10,000-ish probably. But after that, then we're going to settle back down, I think, and we'll be pretty good on elections for a while, one would hope. But the voting booths that we have are
Hey, Will, can you tell the committee when this current ballot machine that we own now was purchased?
2008, I believe. So it's
Good old days.
let me know if you've got anything in your house from 2008 in electronics. I don't. It runs on Windows XP, barely.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we will move on to Lynn. Thank you, Will.
Okay, so in mine, I think the only big jump that I have is in conferences and training. I did note that there were a few conferences or training sessions that I wanted to go to this year, and the budget just wasn't there for it, and I think some of them are really important, so I increased that. Other than that, let's see, what else did I have? I do have the budget software in there, the ongoing cost. That actually will go down by about $4,000. I can pull that down now that I've kind of settled in on which one we're going to be getting. And the audit is down a little bit. Every other year it goes down because they can roll forward on my actuarial audit. I think that's about all I've got, if you guys have questions.
I'm sorry, so you said the audit line will go down as well?
The audit line
Did go down?
did go down a little bit. I back it down every other year because they roll forward some of my numbers.
Lynn, can you talk about the audit? I mean, I don't know who we use.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a history there.
Sure.
Do we look at that in terms of bidding it on some frequency, or do we stay with who we know because we're good and we like them? And
We go with Plotzik and Sanderson, who's very well respected. They do a lot of audits for the state. We don't go out to bid. We do use them because they are familiar with us and how we do things. And I know that sometimes people can worry about a comfort level there. You get comfortable with your auditors, but we always have the same lead auditor, which is Tyler. But the other people that come in, there's about 5 of them, are always different every time. So it's a different set of eyes looking at it, where we don't have to go with an entirely different company. So Tyler knows what we do, what we are, and how we operate. But there are 5 sets of new eyes every year, making sure that I haven't become friends with some of the auditors, or that they haven't gotten complacent because they know us so well.
And you're comfortable with the level of that expenditure in terms of if we went to BB's audit firm and asked her to bid on it, and she would come in at a number that's very close to what we pay?
I think that they would, and I just had a thought in my head and it went right out the door. I think they would come in pretty close. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that if we have a new firm in, and a lot of this is time spent in it, and I think if you have a new firm come in, they're going to spend more time getting to know us and getting to know how to do things. This firm will support me throughout the year. So if I have something hit that's a little bit odd, or I can reach out through email, and they are very responsive of how to have that hit the GL, and making sure that it's done correctly.
And they don't bill you for that?
They do not bill me for that. They also do my MS 535 for me, which is huge. It made me cry one year trying to do it with the DRA, and they do that very quickly and very accurately.
Great. The other question I have is on the treasurer compensation at $3,000. How do we determine compensation for those kinds of roles? Because I noted there's, maybe BB you can add to this, is selectmen people get paid $5,000, moderator for $4,000, treasurer for $3,000, trustee of the trust funds is $1,000. I mean, what's the basis for determining these
All of that was set before I was here, but it's the select board decides what is a reasonable compensation for the role that they're going to play and chooses that number. As you can see for the treasurer, it's been the same
Yeah.
right along, so.
Increase the moderator, didn't we?
You did increase the moderator
$5,000.
a little bit this year.
I'm thinking of it more in terms of level of effort as opposed to it being too much and fair compensation for work.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can I,
Please.
I'm on a roll.
Yeah, go ahead.
The new computer software, computer support line, the software support line of 25,000. And it was listed, I believe, as an estimate of what we might incur. What are we thinking about in that line item?
Is that the budget software one?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So setup is going to be the 25,000 that was approved for this fiscal year. And that's actually, the company that I'm going to go with is 24/7. Not 24/7 in time, like $24,700 to set up. They will be a little lower on my ongoing cost for next year. It's going to be 20,000 and change, so about $21,000 for next year.
And does that fall in the computer support line?
No, that's on the budget.
That's the budget.
That's the budget line.
Okay.
Yep. I was asked last year to break it out so that everybody could see that as a separate line item.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Following up on that, could you just share with the team what is it that the 21,000 is buying?
So the software, the budget software package that we've been looking at, and John and Colin had a chance to look at the two different ones that we were looking at, and Chief Cobb has also participated to make sure that all, different eyes are on it. It's going to be a budget software package that will allow access to the budget for unlimited users. You guys would be able to jump on, look at the budget, play with numbers, do scenarios, forecast out without actually changing numbers. I will be able to send budgets to each of the departments, and they will be able to plug in their numbers, and they can do a 2% increase or 2% or change this, or personnel if I want to add somebody, and they can also do some scenarios. They would then kick the budget back to me, I lock it, and then we start working on, setting up your reports. But it basically will take the manual process that we do right now, which is a lot of spreadsheets. Every time we change something, I update 3-4 spreadsheets or change this. It will do that automatically. It also includes a module for capital improvements and capital reserves. And I know Adam was kind enough to just take a quick look at that with the person that I've been dealing with, just to make sure there were no red flags, and he said it's definitely something that they could utilize, and there was nothing that jumped out as, well, that's not something we'll use. So it's something we would be able to utilize, and I think it'll help us streamline the numbers and get them more accurate, get better predictions of what do we need, or where does this put us 5 years down the road. So that's what that includes, and it's a huge training process, and they train the trainer, so I'll be able to train anybody who wants to use it, or they'll train you. So I think it's a good program.
So for full disclosure, I've, as Lynn said, I was part of the, I don't know what we want to call it,
The viewing team?
the viewing team. That's as good as anything else. And I have sort of been scratching my head as to why the cost going forward is similar to the purchase costs. Typically you buy software and there's a licensing fee, which typically is not the same as your purchase cost. So have you been able to find any information about that?
Right, because they discounted basically they took away all the training and setup for us buying it. So they discounted that first year by all the training. They took away $14,000 if we buy all the modules and go with that contract. So it is more, except they're willing to discount it. ClearGov did the same thing. They discounted, but ClearGov added it back later on, which I found.
If we decide in 2 years from now not to fund it, do you keep the software?
No, it's cloud-based, but you can, if you decide not to fund it, you just 60 days notice and you're out. But no, you don't get to keep it.
So we're captive to the software provider once you've got all your data loaded into their cloud.
We are.
So it's something we should talk about.
Okay.
I mean, they may not, I mean, everything we looked at, there's no solution, they're all cloud-based.
Right.
And I don't know whether anybody else around the table has any experience from a business point of view on how that plays out, but it always scares me when we become captive to a provider.
Right.
Right?
No, I understand. I can ask some further questions on that. If is there a data dump that they do when you're leaving to make sure that you,
Yeah.
do have all your,
Keep our data. They
Right,
Give us
right.
our data.
right, you just can't utilize it within the program. So I'll ask that question. I'll give them a call tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I have a couple. The electricity contract, I know
Yes.
several months ago, there were some questions about whether or not all the buildings were engaged in it. Do we have confirmation that every building using electricity is covered by these contracts?
What happened, so I finally heard back from Jamie,
Yeah.
and because Eversource right now is lower than those contracts would have been, they did not enter the contract. They're with Eversource, and then the plan is that come January, February, when we go with the community power, all of the town buildings will be in community power.
And that was my second question. Is the budget represent the community power contract rates?
It does not, it represents the current Eversource rates.
So do we know what advantage we may secure in the budget with those new rates?
I don't know what the new rates will be for community power, they just promised they'll be less than Eversource, the rates that Eversource sets in February.
So we won't know till February.
So we won't know till February.
Do you think that, I just wanted, can the Energy Committee give us some sense, or they have no knowledge whatsoever about it?
I can certainly ask if they have an idea of where Eversource is going to land. But what I've gotten so far is, community power will be less than Eversource.
Okay, gas bill contract for propane.
Yes,
Every building that's on propane has that?
yes. They're all involved in it, and we pay $1.55
I was going to ask you
a
to
gallon.
say that. It's pretty staggering.
It is, because we commit to 19,000 gallons of it.
Yeah.
So they drop that rate way low.
I would like the employees in the town to benefit from that.
Yeah, and I asked about that, and the only thing that Irving will do is if you go with them, they give you a 10 or 20 cent discount on their current rate, which is something, but it's certainly not the discount that the town gets for the
Is
volume.
that their response to employee participation? What about town citizen participation?
I didn't ask that question. I can find out.
And is it worth our while, you and I talked about this, and I don't know if you've done it, and I was half joking, but I think I'm more serious now, collaborate with the school and the hospital and see if we can drive our rates down further?
That's somewhere to go, yeah. I don't know. Can they go lower than 150?
It's all a matter of volume.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
In fact, they're making money off the $1.55, so
They are, which is,
it's a telling story, isn't it?
it's disheartening when you get your bill and it's $4.50.
Yeah, I know.
Absolutely.
So can we take an action?
$1.55, yes.
Maybe not for purposes, well, actually, the school too. How does the school work for?
They negotiate the rates too, so I just made a note to myself to
Yeah.
ask Larry what the rates are that he's negotiated for next year.
I mean, listen, it's not something that we can accomplish between now and February, but I think that for next year, if we can have an action plan that collaborates with the library, with the hospital, Colby Sawyer, and the
Right.
school department, maybe
That's-
the rates go down further.
Yeah, I think,
Right.
yeah. I mean, we certainly can increase the gallons, and that's what drives the rates down.
Exactly right. yeah.
Okay.
Because I know that when I walk my dog around the school, they're over there every Sunday morning.
Phil.
Irving, right? It's Irving, right?
Yes, it
Filling
is.
them all up, so.
Yep. Okay, definitely, I'll put that on my calendar.
Car and truck gas and fuel. So that would be for PD, FD, DPW.
Yep.
Do we have a contract with anybody for that?
We use WEX, which is a state discounted rate that we get when they swipe their card. So they all have WEX cards, and they utilize it. They're in every town vehicle, and they're at a discounted rate. I don't know what the cost per gallon is right now. It does fluctuate with the market, but it is lower than what you're going to pay at the tank.
Do we do that with the diesel fuel as well? No. And I assume the fire department uses
Question.
diesel? Yeah. So I know that, when you drive by some towns, some of the bigger towns, and when you drive by highway departments that are state-run, they have their own gas pumps, the diesel pumps, right? Have we ever looked at trying to secure our own diesel pumps for purposes of taking care of our requirements? Maybe we have them, I don't know.
Are you talking for gasoline?
I'm talking about diesel fuel for your trucks.
Diesel fuel right now, Jay comes down and gets it from us.
So you have a diesel, okay.
We have a diesel tank there, and we share the,
Okay.
whatever they use for fuel, they pay for, and whatever we use, we
Yeah.
pay for. Pretty much get it, same rate.
And the gas that you guys use is that card?
Yeah, and the advantage with that, with a card, if I got to run for parts, or I could be in Londonderry and my fuel's getting low, or Massachusetts, the WEX card can be used at any location. So there's, we thought about getting a diesel pickup because we have the fuel tank, but then we'd still have to have some sort of a card, so I didn't see a benefit there with the cost of diesel, so.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you. And for future discussion, just as an action, I know, Lynn, you and I chatted, software, are you able to pull together all the software and vehicle equipment maintenance and aggregate them into one file so we can look at it, year-over-year budget?
So you want me to break out like what's in that line so that you can see that some of it's Avatar, some of it's Unismart, some of it's, right?
No, maybe software is not a good idea, but maybe the equipment and vehicle maintenance, if you can pull out all the.
Oh, yeah.
Maintenance lines.
Yeah, I can run a report. I can run, actually, it's this report,
Yeah.
but it
For
just
those
gives
lines?
you those line items. Yeah, I can do that.
I think that'd be useful for
Yeah.
future conversation. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, is that it for Lynn? Anybody have anyone else for Lynn? Okay. Assessing, who does assessing?
Usually Kim, but that's the Tri-Town assessing number, and I think that's I think last year when we started, it was a placeholder. I think that's our actual, what's going to be our charge for Tri-Town assessing.
93,777.
Yes.
Can you explain that? What is it? What are we buying here?
So we share an assessor
Yeah.
and I don't know what Joe's title is, an assistant assessor. We share it with Sunapee, Newbury, and us, and that covers the costs of those employees. Kim could speak to it a little more than I because she's the one who manages that contract with them. So it includes their wages, a portion of their wages, their benefits, and those items, and I don't know what else it would include.
Okay.
We're 33% of the budget,
Yeah,
Yeah.
approximately.
based on
It's
properties, right? Yeah.
right.
So the full cost is? Yeah.
It's a good question, because because now I'm curious about it, because I
A lot of
know
money.
we pay Newbury, and Newbury pays, and Sunapee pays Newbury, and then Newbury pays the assessors' salaries and everything so is it Newbury that comes up with the total budget and then tells New London, this is your portion?
I think yes.
Maybe it's something we can just carry forward with Kim, too, when she's here. Okay. Legal?
There's not a lot to say about legal. We go over quite often, and you really can't predict what you will or won't need for legal.
Any questions for legal?
Is there a way, are there the possibility of having like a legal plan of some sort, and that would pay for, just to, we used to have it in parts of the government that you could, in federal government, you could, you'd pay for a particular sum, and that would include legal services?
A retainer,
Yeah.
paying a monthly retainer.
Yeah, well, or another, or a plan
Yeah.
that would guarantee legal services for a fixed cost.
Kim would probably be the best one to answer that question, being that she's a lawyer herself. We used to do that at the school district. We paid a monthly retainer to a law firm. It's a heck of a lot more than this.
So we'll hold that question for Kim? Okay. Okay, Personnel Administration? Any questions? And this is all about insurance and,
Right, our insurance is a 16-point something not to exceed, and that's what we've put in here. That rate will come down to us probably after town meeting, but we will adjust for that. And,
but this is for insurance for who? Personnel Administration is the insurance for,
oh, I'm sorry, wrong line item. Right, so that's reimbursable from the library, and that's based on the current level of employees. So we get that back on the revenue side. Same thing with life and disability, FICA, New Hampshire retirement. Those all come back to us.
but it's just still the same 16% plus for the insurance-related ones, right?
Right, that goes up the same as us.
For insurance, when was the last time we reviewed our insurance plans and policies?
Last year, we did get quotes from other companies. The problem we run into is that they are not robust the way the plan we're on now, and they would not include a number of doctors and out of state, which we do have an employee who's out of state. So we did take a look at that, and the rates were comparable to what we're paying right now for less services.
How often do we actually look at that?
That was the first time since I've been in this position. I don't know how often they did before.
And do we put a bid out for it, or do we just troll?
We contacted a few
Yeah.
companies and just asked them to float us some pricing. The advantage to being with Health Trust is that they offer a lot of other things, along with the insurance. They offer the employee assistance plan. So it is a little bit more than just insurance, but.
Yeah. I mean, I'll bring this up with Kim, but, it might fall in your bailiwick, so you can think about it, but, COLA has a component in it that's health insurance. And if I recall correctly, last year, the federal government COLA percent for health insurance was like 5%. And I was scratching my head on how, and I don't know how COLA works, but I was scratching my head on how the COLA adjustment is 5%. It's a weighted average, right? So, and our insurance rates are going up 13, 14, 15%. I'm perplexed.
They did say that what they're seeing a lot right now is they're seeing a higher cost on people that are getting services done that they waited during the pandemic. So people are going and they're once again getting their routine checks, which they kind of stopped during the pandemic, but because they stopped, the findings from those routine checks are more expensive. So someone who put off, a colonoscopy, now they're seeing the added costs of them putting it off. And he said that's where they're getting hit with the added insurance.
Okay. Any other questions for Lynn? Planning and zoning?
Yeah,
That
I
Adam?
have one,
Oh,
please.
Please, go ahead.
Leave time buyout. there's a number in there.
Right.
Can you generally talk about leave time buyout? And can employees carry a balance to a certain level so it keeps increasing year over year over year until it's
Yes.
used?
Yep. So 240 hours.
Yeah.
If you don't use it, anything over 240 at the end of each year, you lose that. But if you leave, your leave, any accrued leave time is paid out to you. And that's what that covers.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Adam?
This goes up anymore. Hopefully you can hear me. So my budget this year, you will notice that the primary increase, my budget is not responsible for a building or any large equipment, so it is primarily my salary and benefits, and then some statutorily required processes for to administer planning and zoning. So you will notice that the salary line there does show a larger increase, which is that sort of nuance of the last year's not being covered in the budget. However, mine is a little bit unique as part of the salary study this year. My position and the sewer operator's position were the two that were identified to not be in the right pay grades for the last however many years we've each been employed with the town.
Part of that 150,000 that's been put aside is going to accommodate that?
Nope.
No,
these
because he's
adjustments-
already been moved up the grade.
These adjustments
that's
happened
already in
this
here.
summer with the findings of the report. So, but then of course now is the first budget where we actually have that data. So it looks larger than what other departments may look. From the rest of the budget, everything is pretty much stable or just sort of responding to increases over the last couple of years through our planning board and zoning board secretary wages. We've had a variety of complex cases the last couple of years, so we've had more meetings and longer meetings that have resulted in those increases, and so we've adjusted to reflect that. Are there any questions on any of that?
Any questions for Adam? Please, Lou.
Adam, would you have any idea, now that with the new flood maps that are going to be coming up, and there's probably going to be several more properties in London, whether that may impact your budget at all? Because you're probably going to end up with a lot of administrative costs and...
Yeah, I don't think that it will have a substantial impact. They'll provide us with the shape files that FEMA has. So for everyone who may not be aware, we've talked about it at a variety of selectmen's, planning boards, meetings, and others, but periodically FEMA remaps the floodplains, and it's not something we have control over. They move from watershed to watershed. So for the current year, it includes the portion of New London that is in the Kentucook watershed. So this is sort of an interesting fact about New London, but we're sort of the continental divide of this portion of the state, where everything to the southwest of Little Sunapee Road, more or less, ends up going to Big Lake Sunapee and then the Sugar River, and then to the Connecticut River to Long Island Sound. Everything to the northeast of that goes Pleasant Lake, Messer Pond into Clark Pond, ends up in the Merrimack River and ends up going into the Atlantic in Salisbury. So we're sort of the split there. So in this project, they're looking at the portion that drains into Pleasant Lake and out of Pleasant Lake. So Murray Pond or Messer Pond rather, is also included in that. Sorry. So floodplains previously were mapped basically on paper. There was not a lot of in-person actual measurements taken, and so they are notoriously bad. And so property owners have the ability to get a LOMA, a letter of map amendment, that says, hey, I'm really not in the floodplain, and I've hired a surveyor to come out and prove that. They take real flood data. Most of our lakes are dam controlled, so there's not significant floodplains, but on paper sometimes it looks like there is. For example, all the houses on Lighthouse View Road appear like they're in the floodplain, but then again, everyone has obtained a LOMA so that they can modify their home. So in an effort to improve that, they are gradually moving from watershed to watershed. Now, some people will benefit and they are no longer in the floodplain, and some people, unfortunately, will now be in the floodplain. And then they will have the opportunity to then go get a LOMA if they want to, or they may now be required to get flood insurance by their mortgage bank through the FEMA, or the National Flood Insurance Program, rather. So I don't think that we'll have substantial cost with this. We will have to generate some new maps, but we have about $1,500 that we keep in the budget every year to utilize some technical planning services through the Regional Planning Commission or another agency. Some years that pays for updated zoning maps. Some years we've used it in concert with the Conservation Commission to get updated maps. This year I anticipate that floodplains would be the priority for that. And FEMA will provide us with all of the shape files, which is the digital file that we then send to Cartographics, who maintain our online mapping system, and they simply upload it and replace it with what's there currently.
Any other questions? And I know you haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but there was a lot of conversation about the master plan.
Yeah, I was sorry that I had a family obligation last week.
No, hey, that's okay.
So I think an important part to remember of the master plan is, though it lives under the planning board, there are a whole bunch of town committees and individual departments that contribute to the master plan. On the master plan subcommittee, we had representation from the select board, the energy committee, the conservation commission, the zoning board, the planning board, and so there's a variety of objectives that stems from each one of those disciplines and those specialties that end up in the master plan. So at any one time, there is a vast amount of very different work going on. So if you look at the implementation table, which I think is somewhere around 25 items, the planning board may be working on 4 or 5 of those, which right now are very heavily housing focused. But then if you go down and look at the waste reduction section, and there's another 6 items there that have to do with compost and waste reduction and styrofoam and all sorts of things, we have a whole nother committee working on those objectives at the same time. And then if you go down to the community facilities section and you look at, there's, the police station, obviously there's many different facets of town working on that situation. Under that, there's also energy concerns in the community facilities. We have the energy committee working very hard on that. When I left the town office tonight, they were talking about that. Under that same one, we have the emergency shelter, which Lou and his crew are working on a regular basis. So there are a lot of moving parts that are under the auspice of the master plan that are being worked on all the time, that are sort of outside of the planning board's everyday control, that I don't think people always realize. And so I think that is important to remember. As far as the planning board's work in the last 2 years, they have really harbored the support of the Housing Commission, and we've worked very closely with them last year with the amendments for the overwrite, or the rewrite of the Workforce Housing Overlay District. And this year they've been working with them on some accessory dwelling unit updates. Which they had their last work session with them last Friday morning at 7 o'clock, if anyone has nothing to do at 7 o'clock on a Friday. And we anticipate moving that forward to public hearing and then for the voters this year. So there are a variety of different things in the master plan that are being worked on at any one time.
The item that brought it up was the sidewalks.
Sure. And I do have I was hoping I had a couple of minutes that we could talk about the Main Street study if there's no other budget-related questions. So I think it's also important to remember that, sidewalks was a fraction of what we had hoped to do in the Main Street study. That whole corridor plan was envisioned to look at everything from form-based code. So form-based code is a type of zoning ordinance that gets away from a land use-based zoning ordinance and more to a built environment-based zoning ordinance, that we don't so much care what type of commercial use is happening inside the building. What we care about is where does the building fall on the property? Is it up to the sidewalk to create the village aesthetic? If all of the current buildings are set back 10 feet from the sidewalk, we care more about that than whether it's a bakery or a bookstore. And then a whole variety of other parts of form-based that play into the design of the building, the fenestration on it, where the parking is, so that maybe it's in the rear of the building, so that from the street level it creates a more walkable appearance. You're not walking a whole block with a parking lot next to you that creates this really vast, expansive space. You have that sort of village community feel. All of that dovetails into what you experience in the built environment on the pedestrian way as a walker, as a biker, as a motorist, how you're finding your way about town, but then also to the parking. And this was envisioned to encompass all of that. And so I think we maybe have focused on a fraction of that, but I think also you need to realize that that's a state road, and so major changes to the design and layout of that road are much larger than what we can just control here in New London. And so the state has a 10-year plan for long-range transportation planning for funding. It jokingly gets referred to then as the 30-year plan because there are obviously projects who have been on the 10-year plan for decades now. So this is a long-range endeavor. Unfortunately, from 2019, when this first came about, to actually getting something in the budget in 2020 originally, the landscape for consultants changed dramatically. And so what we once thought we could accomplish for $20,000, we came to realize that, one, we would be lucky to find an engineer, and two, it would be substantially more expensive. Just as an example, we have to occasionally hire engineers for third-party reviews for planning and zoning board cases. This was usually about a $2,000 expense. The applicant is on the hook for reimbursing us for that cost. For a zoning board case this year, I had to go to 9 different engineers to find one that had the ability to even take on the project, and it was $9,500. And so it's 5 times what the cost would have been 2 years ago. And it's purely supply and demand. They know that they're the only firm that had time to take it on short notice for us. And so in the meantime, the Housing Commission was encouraged through the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority to follow up on the grant funds that they received a couple of years ago and submit an application for the Housing Opportunities Program. And so they have been preliminarily awarded $100,000 to work with a grant to look at how zoning impacts housing, and one of those objectives is form-based code. And so, the Planning Board and the Housing Commission thought that it would be wise to spend the grant money first, see how far. It's obviously not going to accomplish everything that we hoped the Main Street corridor study would, but see what we could get accomplished out of the grant funding first before we spend the taxpayer dollars, because obviously we're going to have to ask for more money the next time around, and so that we can hopefully be further along and we can narrow our scope when we actually get to put something out to a complete RFP. And so with all of that understood, the Planning Board this year, and Charlie may have gone over this last week when the CIP happened, so forgive me if you did, but the Planning Board added in a project in the CIP for a mobility enhancement study. I believe it was fiscal year 26 or 27, hoping that the Housing Commission project is done by then. The money for the Housing Opportunities Grant is held up in a little bit of political turmoil right now, where New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority has not, there's a a bit of a dispute going on at the state level as to who will be the one to administer it, whether it will be New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority or the Bureau of Economic Development. And so all of the grant awards are sort of stuck waiting. We thought we'd had the money in August, and so we're all still waiting for that. Peter Nichols, the Housing Commission Chair, stays in regular communication with the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and they are the folks administering the application process, and they stay positive and encouraging. So we have, the money is allocated in the state budget. We're just waiting for Governor and Council to actually approve it and release it.
It's very helpful.
So that's sort of a very quick overview. But
So the corridor study really is far bigger than quote-unquote walking and biking.
Correct.
So
Correct.
should there be, the conversation last week sort of got to the point of saying maybe, and you heard it when we were talking about action items, that do we want to accelerate that? But you're suggesting that it's not really related.
Correct. And I think that there's a difference between, there are obviously deficiencies in the existing condition of the sidewalks, and those are sort of maintenance items that absolutely should be taken care of. And I think that hopefully that can be accomplished far sooner than a 10 to 30 year plan. And I know that there was discussion on the water precincts activities, just as if we were the entity that was replacing the sewer lines, they're only obligated to put things back the way they've found it. Now, of course, you can't put it back in decrepit condition, so at least it will be put back, with new materials and new condition, but the design does not change. Similarly with the street, I mean, you can't, aside from maybe some striping or, that sort of eliminating a couple of parking spaces because they're going to have to do an overlay, you're not going to be changing where bulb outs are to shorten sidewalks or where maybe some benches or that sort of thing could be put.
So if I play the movie out, depending upon where these pipes are, let's for discussion purposes say that they're always inside the curb on the street side. Right, and they're going to disrupt some curbs, and they'll fix the curb stones. They're going to rip up the road. They're going to patch the road. Are they going to
I
pave the
thought they had
entire
to put a
road?
whole overlay, but that's sort of outside of my, it's more of a public works.
I believe the state will actually make them pave at least that one side of the road.
Okay. Because that would be pretty messy if it was just a bunch of patches, right?
Yeah. I know Continuum's going to be digging up County Road. I've been holding off paving that by the hospital in hopes that it'll save the taxpayers a little bit of money. One thing is, I don't go in there and pave it and they tear up what I just did. The other thing, whatever they're tearing up, they're going to put it back the way it was, so which would be new pavement. So it's typically the same thing. And I believe the water department has a policy like that if anybody works in a road as well.
Okay.
And just for, it's important to remember that it's not just going to be the line down the middle of the road, that there are connections to each one of the houses and the businesses, that presumably there will be, disturbance outside of just the actual main.
Okay, so it seems to me that we have to have a conversation during the capital side that says, if in fact the schedule is going to be done in '25, should there be monies put aside for fixing what the town's responsible for, like the sidewalks, making them, they might put them back into order, but it may not be according to the likings of the town, right? Or is it? That's how that works.
I think seeing a detailed construction plan from the water precinct would answer some of these questions, and I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if any of the other department heads have. So I think that is forthcoming. I think they're getting ready to put it out for an RFP. So I think once we see that, we could plan better.
Okay, so back to the sidewalk. So the sidewalks conversation was a lot more than just Main Street. Right, so you saw Bob Hour's note. Did you see his note to the select board?
To me,
Bob Hour's note, so we should get Adam that note. Because we'll talk about it during the capital reserve, but just take some time to think about this. I forgot about the tracking form, so it'd be I think it'd be interesting. I'd look for the the team's input, if we had that tracking form and understood where we were against that tracking form as input to what's the priorities. For example, if something is 50% farther behind than everything else, should that be a priority to bring it up to, par with the rest of the things that are underway from a capital point of view, right? So
Sure.
I know that Tim indicated that, there wasn't, it's the list, but there really wasn't a prioritization or a decision process.
There wasn't a prioritization, and that was by design, because I think if we, in 2021, had chosen what our priority was then, it would not be where we anticipated that it would be today. So when we sent out the master plan survey in 2019, we were sort of interrupted for the year of the pandemic, trying to wait to get back in person to have these community conversations. Unfortunately, though, all of the content that was collected in that survey was a pre-pandemic world. And so in that time, we went from simply having a workforce housing issue to a entire housing crisis outside of just workforce housing. And so I think that, at that point, even in early 2021, when the plan was really finished in the end of 2020 and adopted, I think it was January of 21, but don't hold me to that. I don't think we saw where we would be here in such a significant focus on housing at that point. It was in, the top responses in the questions, but not to the level that we've seen it at this point. So I think, we're always careful to prioritize things because it's dynamic and, current events change and times change and we need to be able to adapt to that. And that's the hardest part of it, a long-range 10-year plan. Who knows?
Would you be kind enough to send us a link to where we can see the tracking form?
Sure. Yep. It's right under the, yep. It's the full master plan. It's at the end. I can send you a link to that.
And would you be in any position to join us when we do the reserves and capital budgeting so that, I think there may be some questions about how would you score it? For each of those tracking items, is it an A, is it a B, is it a C, is it an F? Are we doing well, are we failing,
Sure.
I think that would be helpful to us in developing some prioritization, right?
Yep, and I just want to make sure that then it's also taking into account a lot of the objectives there are then identified by department heads in the CIP as well. So I think that we just want to make sure that, if there's, sidewalk improvements that Bob has already in the CIP, that we're all sort of on the same page there.
Yeah, we've got to tie it all together. I agree.
Yep. And also I would say, I think that this could be a good conversation with the planning board members, so please come to planning board meetings if you want to, we could gladly reserve some time. They end up being a pretty busy group with actual development applications, but, we could certainly find a time. And just sort of an aside, I think, again, with the work that the Housing Commission has done, I'm really happy that you all as New London voters supported the Housing Commission. I don't think that the Planning Board ever could have gotten the amount of work done in the last 2 years without this group. I go to all the Housing Commission meetings, but the Planning Board members certainly could not add that to their schedule. Just in the last 5 months, I think the Housing Commission met something like 11 times for a few hours at a time, so that they can then deliver that work to the Planning Board, and then they have work sessions together where they bat it back and forth and things change, and we meet somewhere in the middle. But there is a substantial amount of work already done by the Housing Commission, and without those 10 people, I don't think we could be where they've gotten to with the amendments that they've worked on so far. So,
well, thank you for everything you do. And what Adam is saying, I was thinking about, maybe, it's an aside, for whatever it's worth. The community meeting that's coming up, maybe it's too late, but I think one topic would be celebrating the volunteers in this town. There are so many people who dedicate their time, and we should celebrate who they are, right? So, anyway.
I fully agree. As someone who works with 30 different volunteers on my 3 boards, it's amazing the amount of time that they dedicate to this town each year.
It's the heart and soul of the town.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. On to other business. Anybody have other business?
Just quickly, I was wondering if BB had a rough agenda for that Friday morning meeting.
Nope, we're finalizing it in the next week. All I know is that the water precinct folks will be there. I know that's going to be a a big topic, and, you know, that might cover a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then we really want to open it up to the people that are there to say, what are the issues that are on your mind? It's giving that opportunity for people to really bring their issues to us.
And then, unless I missed it,
Unless I missed it, are there donuts and coffee, or?
To talk to the boss about that.
It's not in the budget.
I think there will be coffee.
Anybody have any other business? If we could just open up our books and look at the committee review schedule. I promise we do this before we adjourn. So there's two things obviously we're going to bring, we'll ask Kim to go through the administration. I guess we can do that next week. We have to put revenue in here somewhere, so I guess we can look for, I'm just looking at it, I'm thinking maybe if we do revenue on January 10th, the organizations that are there, social services, health and welfare, library, we've already done, recreation, they don't really occupy a lot of time, and they're not huge budgets. So if people are okay putting revenue on January 10th. And I personally believe, though time may prove me wrong, I think that the capital reserve funds, given the conversation we had this week and last week around priorities and strategies and master plan relationships, that'll probably take 2 nights if we want to do it right. But those are my comments on the schedule. Everyone okay with that? Okay, next meeting is next week, and in addition to Kim, we'll have our public safety conversations with the 2 chiefs, and I guess it'll be Lou, you? Okay. We're going to sign off. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great night.